Hello everyone and welcome back to this channel. I am finally back for my first reading wrap-up of 2023. I'm just going to call this my quarter year reading wrap-up because some of these I read in January, most of them I read in March, but we're back for the wrap-ups and I was so excited to talk about books with you guys. So let's just get right into it. We're here today and I have only 2 physical books here on my side, but I'm going to start with these, and the first book over here is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And this book, I absolutely loved it. So the idea behind this book is that these 2 protagonists meet as children and then later on in life they reconnect after having a falling out, and then they design their first games together. Now, Sam is more on the designer side of these games and Sadie is more on the programming side of these games, and this is like at the early onset of gaming, so like 90s, early 2000s, and I just enjoyed this book so much. One, because it was set in like the 90s and early 2000s and I could really resonate with this book because I am a 90s child, so I remember the Game Boy, I remember the first PC games, I remember all of that coming. It was just kind of cool to see like an insight into that world and also see a lot of comparisons to different games that I've played or wasn't allowed to play when I was a kid, so that's one of those things. What I really enjoyed about this book was basically how real this felt. This is one of those books where you really just deep dive into the characters. You have such a strong relationship with both of the characters. It was just a wonderful exploration of platonic friendships and platonic relationships. And I think that's also something that I really enjoyed about this book. Sam and Sadie, very often we have this romantic relationship that we explore, and in this book it is a platonic friendship and how that relationship evolves over time. What I also found super interesting was the discussion around feminism, or it actually wasn't really a discussion, it was more of like every once in a while Sadie would comment on how she's perceived as a woman in the gaming world. And I feel like I've been thinking a lot about like feminism and how it changes throughout the ages. And even though it's only like 30 years ago, oh my god, I'm getting so old, but the 90s are not that far off. I mean, I grew up in them and I'm not super old, at least. My mom in that time, I always wonder like what feminism did for her. I mean, she was one of the first working moms where I lived. She had it all, you know, she had her job, she had her career, but she also had me and a family, but she was also heavily judged by the people around her. And I always wonder like what her workplace was like and how she was perceived as a working mom, and how that is completely different to the feminism that we have today that tries to be more inclusive, that tries to, you know, not just work for the white woman out there, but for all kinds of women. And that was just a super interesting thought that I had like in the back of my mind. And this book kind of touched on that, how feminism changed throughout the ages. And even if it's such a short period of time, how much can change in those periods. And I wonder what my kids will grapple with versus what I am now challenged with. So I just really enjoyed this book. It's also just a wonderful story. It's a wonderful relationship exploration. And I actually gave this book a 5 stars. So this was my first read of the year and it was just like jackpot. It was a wonderful book. This was the perfect book to just delve back into reading. So the other book I have over here that is actually a physical copy is Fiona and Jane. And this is a book that I got last year from Book of the Month. Both of these girls, or women as they grow up to be, are Taiwanese American. And what I really appreciated in the story was like the struggle of Taiwanese people and how their view is kind of on China and how the relations are over there, because it's a very complicated situation. I've been in Taiwan myself and I am a huge fan of Taiwan, and Taiwanese people are just the most wonderful ever. And so I was really happy to see this representation in literature, to see a Taiwanese American author and kind of hear that perspective. But I have to say the story itself wasn't much my thing. So I kind of realized that this story is more like a collection of short stories. I think that describes this best. We always get a perspective, one from Fiona, then from Jane, one from Fiona, then Jane, and these short stories are over the courses of their complete lives. They do have some family trauma and some trauma that is like passed down to several different generations, and it's kind of interesting to see that woven into the story. But because it was so detached and I didn't expect it to be short story like, I just just didn't have a connection to either of the characters at all. I thought it was interesting to explore their characters, especially because they're friends from school, and then it kind of shows how their relationship changes over time as they grow up and they work and they have their careers. And so that was kind of interesting for me to see or to watch. But in general, I just felt very disconnected to the story. It just wasn't my cup of tea. But I'm definitely going to keep watching the author because I think we will see many great things from her. I think this was her debut novel or one of her first novels, but I think we can expect great things. It would be interesting to see what she does in the future. So I gave this 3 stars. So for the next books, I only read them as ebooks or as audiobooks, so I don't have any physical copies for you anymore. The next book that I read was Carrie Soto is Back, and it's the newest Taylor Jenkins read, and I was really curious to hear from this. However, I've also heard a lot of criticism from the Latinx community because the protagonist in the story, Carrie Soto, is Latina, and a lot of people feel that the Latinx representation here was not very accurate. Now, that's not something I can judge, but I can completely understand when it's just awkward when white authors are telling stories from other communities. So I borrowed this book from like an online e-library instead of purchasing it. So that was my way of looking at this, but I still was very curious as to see what she was writing. Taylor Jenkins' read style is just fantastic when it comes to celebrities. She's just so good at creating characters in this celebrity realm, and she did that once again with this story. Carrie Soto is a professional tennis player. The story begins when she is already retired, but a newcomer in tennis is about to overtake her record of winning the most slams as a woman. Because this person is overtaking her record, she of course feels like, yes, I have to take back my record and get back into things. And then we kind of look back and we're given her whole story of how she became a tennis pro, and then the story unfolds. Absolutely enjoyed this book. Now, I am not a tennis pro, but I started playing tennis the year before last, so at least there were a lot of words that I knew, and I'm very grateful that I knew a bit about the sport, not enough to actually judge how everything and if all the plays that they made sense, but enough to understand what she was trying to say, because I think if I knew nothing about tennis, this book would have been kind of difficult to read. But what she just does fantastically is just build up these celebrity figures. It's just so easy to relate to them and to have fun with them and just enjoy their story, even though it's so far off from anything in my life. I mean, I'm not becoming any form of a sports pro player, but I just still enjoyed the story so much. I think the character arc was predictable, but very nice. It was still well done. And even if something is predictable, sometimes if it's just written well, it's just fun to watch. It was also kind of cool because this story once again plays like in the world of Evelyn Hugo and Malibu Rising. So they're not the exact same and they don't reference each other. You don't have to know of any of the other books, but it was kind of cool to see, okay, it's in the same world. So I had so much fun with this book. This book actually felt more like an autobiography than it did as a work of fiction, and I think that's just the thing that Taylor Jenkins Reid does best. So because I had so much fun with this book, I don't think it'll be my favorite. I think my favorite is still Evelyn Hugo, but because I had so much fun with this was actually also a 4-star read. It would really interest me though if you are the Latinx community or part of that community. Please let me know in the comments how you feel about the book and the representation, and if you felt it was good representation or not, because I feel like that is one aspect of Carrie Soto that was not explored at all. It felt more like a gimmick that she and her father were speaking Spanish every once in a while than it actually did like a deep dive into her as a Latina in the sports pro sector. An audiobook that I listened to this month was The Paris Apartment. I've listened to a few Lucy Foley books and I've always enjoyed them. I think Lucy Foley has a nice like crime thriller style. It's just fun to read. I would never reread them though, which is why I always listen to them as audiobooks. I always prefer them that way. The Paris Apartment I thought was pretty good. It's about a girl who is about to visit her brother in Paris, and she arrives there and we don't know what happened with him. She can't find him. He's mysteriously disappeared. And what I like about this book is that we don't know if somebody was murdered or not. Usually in like crime thriller stories, we know it's a typical whodunit, right? So you come in, someone's murdered, and you try to figure out who it is. And on the way, someone else gets murdered too. And this story was not like that because her brother is missing. So we don't know what happened to him. And I thought it was pretty good. It was fun to read because of that, because it wasn't that typical story. I feel like this story was a bit too long though. I feel like the first half of the book was unnecessarily long, and then I had way more fun in the second half of the book when the story starts to unfold and you start to learn more about the characters and what they're up to, if you know what I mean. I enjoyed this book. It was perfectly good. 3 stars. It was enjoyable, but nothing that will stick in my head forever. So a book that I found in my audiobook app and that I thought sounded interesting was They Both Die at the End. I listened to this book and I listened to it super quickly because it really just grasped me. It's a story about 2 teenage boys. They live in this world where something called, I think it's death call, will call people at midnight and let them know that they're going to die on that day. So they basically say, we don't know when, we don't know how, but in the next 24 hours, you're going to die. I find that a terrible thing. Terrible. I don't want to know when I'm going to die. I really don't. I want to die oblivious. And so these 2 teenage boys, they get the call, they're going to die today. And for some reasons or other that are very difficult to explain, they're alone on that day, and then they download this app that's called Last Friend, and they find each other and they spend their last day together. Cute story. Honestly, I can't say it any differently. I loved both of these characters. I just loved them. They were just wonderful people to spend time with, and that's what this book felt like. It just felt like so much fun to spend time with them. I just enjoyed it so much, and I was very sad at the end. I mean, obviously, you know, they both die at the end. It's in the title. It was still surprising. It still had twists and turns. It was still unexpected. It was a beautiful story of 2 characters finding themselves and finding solace on a day that is that grim. And that's why I just enjoyed it so much. And it's a 4-star read, a very unexpected 4-star read, but I really enjoyed the characters. I had so much fun with them. And I'm glad I clicked on it. I really, truly am. So, the last book I'm going to talk about today was another audiobook that was I'm Glad My Mom Died. And this is a memoir. I don't rate memoirs, so I'm not going to give it a star reading. This was super interesting. So, Jeanette McCurdy, who is the author of this book, she is a Nickelodeon star from iCarly. Now, I didn't watch iCarly because we didn't get it over here in Germany, so I didn't watch it. I, of course, knew of iCarly. I knew of all of those Nickelodeon kids because they were still in the teen magazines, so I knew them, but I had never watched it. And this book was super interesting. She grew up with a narcissistic mother who basically pushed her into acting. You have this mom who's very narcissistic and who's very abusive on the one side. On the other side, you have this acting career and this acting environment, which was at the time, I hope it's just much better today, not very supportive for their children actors, and not a very safe environment because there were still people around that were trying to use that situation for themselves. Now, memoirs are always super fascinating to me because the writing style is obviously not those of a professional writer, but that doesn't mean that the story is bad. It just means that it's in its like own voice, and I very much enjoy this. It also gave me a lot of perspective on body image. I know this sounds very weird, but Jeanette McCurdy has issues, or in this book had issues where it talks very openly about her eating disorders. And I felt like as a kid, when I was growing up, I was always wondering why I was so much different or larger or whatever you want to call it than a lot of child stars that I would see in these magazines. And now the more we hear from these children, or the children who have now grown up and are now adult, and we hear about these eating disorders and these issues of trying to stay thin and trying to stay in that shape, actually gives me more perspective on, man, that was so bad that was the thing that we looked up to back then. Because I would look at these people and be like, why can't I be that thin? And now I know, well, a lot of them had bulimia or anorexia, and of course they were much thinner. That's something that made me a little sad, but that was also a nice personal revelation for me to be like, they shouldn't have been idols for me in the first place. And so why am I still holding on to that? I mean, it's not like I'm holding on to it, but I feel like we still live in a world that tells us to be as thin as possible. So those are all the books I have with me today. Not a huge load because I handed in my thesis in February, and then I was on vacation, and then I had to defend my thesis, and I just did that now. So I am officially done with my degree. I am officially a Master of Science, and I'm so proud of myself. I'm so happy it's over, but that also means that I can finally get back to my hobby and read more books because I have more time to do so. And I'm super excited to start into this year and just talk more about books and fun stuff on this channel here, because now I finally graduated. Oh my God. I can't tell you how excited I am. So thank you for being here today, and we'll see each other in the next video. See you soon. Bye.